So I want to set the stage. When I first moved to New York City back in 1982, I met a madman, a grizzled madman, and he still had those there. And right before he went off to his 3-martini lunch, and he really did that, where he sat at a table with a telephone, he said to me, "If you think you're 1 in a million, don't get too full of yourself because there are 8 of you right here in New York City." And that was my sort of first encounter with the challenges of differentiation. Now, I started working at JWT on the Listerine business, and it's famous for its industrial strength tapes, right? Everybody knows that. But when I started on that business, they had just come out of the largest, let's see, I need to read that, false advertising judgment in the 20th century. They were made to spend money to say they didn't kill the germs they caused colds. So this took a lot of time and money and energy and a lot of smart strategic thinking to overcome. Now, amazingly, Listerine is still the #1 mouthwash in the United States and in the world. Now, I dust off this old story because it is remarkably relevant today with the challenges that brands face. Trust can evaporate in a BuzzFeed minute. And if you don't believe me, talk to the marketers at Wells Fargo. I have. Talk to the marketers at Boeing and ask them what it means to try to rebuild trust. It is not easy, but they can recover. And it takes time and it takes meaningful organizational change, best anchored by a renewed expression of purpose. Now, as Betsy mentioned, in the last decade, I've interviewed over 300 CMOs, and the ones that impress me the most are the ones who don't just talk about purpose and mention Simon Sinek and say, hey, let's start with why. That's cool, right? That's a great place to start. But they're the ones that make sure that the organization takes meaningful actions to back up their newfound righteousness. Let me tell you 2 stories and 2 examples that I think are really interesting. One, 18 months ago, State Street Global Advisors found lightning in a bottle by putting a 4-foot 8-inch statue called a Fearless Girl facing off the bull, the famous charging bull, on Wall Street. Now, the amazing thing about this story is that within hours, selfies with the Fearless Girl went around the world. They got billions, literally billions of impressions as a result of it. But what it allowed State Street is the opportunity to tell a purposeful story. And it was a really simple story. It was that women on boards, A, are underrepresented, but B, when women are on boards, the companies actually outperform other companies on average. Now, this wasn't purely altruistic. State Street Global had a fund that happened to feature companies that had women on the boards. It makes sense. It's all good. Now, since the launch of that campaign, they have cajoled, and it's not just them, there are others, 250 public companies added women to the boards. They literally wrote letters to all of these boards all over the world, including Japan, where there was the lowest representation of women on boards, and they're starting to make strides there. Now, what's interesting here is having started the conversation, State Street had to look inside as well. Turned out they weren't as good at women in glass ceilings as they thought they should have been, so they made organizational changes to break down the barriers to help women do better at their own company. Now, there's a second example I want to share. Several months ago, I interviewed David Edelman, who was the CMO at Aetna. Now, he was determined to rebuild trust and differentiate the brand in a category that ranks, let's see, just below the US government and telco in terms of trust. It's unbelievable how, if they did NPSs, they would be like -30. Now, he was looking to transform Aetna as a company that was essentially known as a no-bird, as in no way we're going to approve that policy, to something that actually would connect with people, that people might actually like. And so he redefined their corporate mission and re-articulated the company promise. Now, before launching what became a public campaign called You Don't Join Us, We Join You, which is an interesting, just think about that language, you don't join us, we join you, that's sort of a commitment in itself. They spent 6 months retraining all of their agents. retraining the agent so that when you called and you said, hey, I'm having a knee surgery, I want to make sure this is approved, the rep was trained to say, oh, well, you know, most people after surgery do physical therapy. Would you like us to talk about some of those options now? And that kind of question and sort of sympathetic understanding of the situation that this individual was going through sort of changed the nature of the conversation. They started to behave, and they were encouraged to behave like humans, which is amazing. So that, it goes a long way to, it's really had a remarkable impact on their NPS. And one other thing that Edelman did, he set up an office of the customer under marketing to make sure that consumers had a direct line to the marketing department, and marketing department had a direct line to the consumer. So he could, if there was a problem, hear about it firsthand. That enabled him to present a new brand to the world. Now the point I'm trying to make, and possibly belaboring, is that great CMOs don't just take what they're given and find a clever way to sell it. That was the Mad Men days. Instead, they have the courage, I'm going to repeat that word, they have the courage to help transform the organization from what it is, most likely the same as everybody else in the category. I did a recent study for my book. I interviewed 106 B2B CMOs and asked the basic question, is your product different from your competitors? 54% said yes, 54% said yes. Then I said, is your marketing different from your competitors? 44% said yes and no. Wait, isn't that your job? 44% of marketers think that their marketing is different than their competition. So, all right. Instead, they have the courage to help transform their organization from what it is, most likely the same as its competitors, into something that is truly, meaningfully differentiated. The alternative is like giving like a French bath to an old hound. It might smell sweet for a moment, for a second, but that dog don't hunt, as they say down south. So now, speaking of courage, and not old dogs, sorry, I'd like to introduce Ben Stewart, who is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer of Bank of the West. In my book, Ben has earned a PhD in differentiation and spent the last 2 decades helping brands like SureScripts, American Express, and Charles Schwab cut through despite being in regulated industries. All right, Ben, let's do this. Yes, Mike. All right. So we're going to talk a lot about the work that he's done at Bank of the West, but before we get there, let's talk about, you spent some time at American Express.
Yep.
And you did kind of something what I would consider one of the coolest campaigns that have ever been done.
Well, I think that's actually one of the biggest learnings about that is that it wasn't one person that did it, and I'll tell you a little story, because one of my biggest learnings about doing Small Business Saturday with American Express was there was actually a guy in the PR department, his name was Tom Sclafani, and he actually came up with the idea of Small Business Saturday. But when it became a huge success, all of a sudden, overnight, it was Crispin Porter's idea. And then the next day, it was Digitas's idea. And seeing them scrap over who was putting whose names on the award application was really interesting to watch. All these people sort of take credit for an idea that was
Success has been found.
absolutely.
And by the way, I love that campaign. I wrote about it in 2012, and then wrote about it again in 2014. The brilliance to me is that it turned marketing, put it in service. If you don't remember Small Business Saturday, it was the only thing that both sides of the House and the Senate agreed upon as a good initiative of 2012. So we learned that success has a lot of fathers, but it certainly distinguished the brand from all the competition by helping small businesses find a place between Black Friday and Cyber Monday.
Yeah, I think when you think about it, Black Friday is all about massive sales. Cyber Monday is all about Amazon massive, and then we sort of went the other way where it's all about small, it's all about charm, it's all about handmade as opposed to factory made. And so again, under the rubric of differentiation. It was definitely different from most of the other retail efforts that are going on at that time, and much more grassroots. The reason Small Business Saturday was successful wasn't because of American Express. It was because of the Chambers of Commerce and Small Business Owners Associations and the merchants themselves. It's truly a movement that was built by small business owners, not by big companies.
Yeah, I think I looked at the 2017 data. I think it was well over 80 million participated. And so now, the thing when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, the thing that really jumped out at me was your time at Charles Schwab and Talk with Chuck, because I knew Schwab as a discount broker. Let's talk about that campaign and how you got there, why you got there, and how it really distinguished the brand.
Well, the context for that's actually pretty interesting because, as with anything, there's usually something going on inside the building. And what was going on inside the building was there was an increasing dissatisfaction with the marketing group. And I had been there 4 years already, and the marketing budget shrank from $350 million down to $34 million in that time. And they're like, marketing really doesn't work. And so we had one internal dynamic, which was marketing doesn't work. And then we had a brand dynamic, which is the Charles Schwab brand had suffered a 67% decrease in brand differentiation. In a world of Scottrade, E-Trade, TD Ameritrade, what was once the original discount broker was now one of many discount brokers. And so the brand was undifferentiated, and as a result, there were fewer customers coming to the bank. And so that's what was going on there. And the quick story is that there are two dynamics going on. When we did the huge audit that you did when you take over a brand job, you say, all right, is there any equity that this company owns? The one equity that came back was approachability. Fidelity owned retirement, expertise was owned by Merrill Lynch, but Charles Schwab owned approachability. And then the other thing, when you get back down to what was the true authentic self about Charles Schwab, is that the company was founded on the belief that investors needed a better shake from Wall Street. Chuck's biography is Crossing Wall Street, which is a double entendre for, when deregulation hit, all of Wall Street raised their prices. What Chuck did was lower their prices. And so he spent his entire career doing the opposite, and still today the company is founded on the belief that people need to get a better deal from Wall Street than they're currently getting. And so it was really the combination of those two ideas with a little bit of inside baseball knowledge that anybody that knows Charles Schwab knows that his name is Chuck. And so anybody would call and go, oh yeah, I used to go to college with Charles Schwab. We go, yeah, right, click. And so it came out as a way to humanize the company and call it what Chuck's real name is. But also, this is a little on the morbid side, but it's true. This is right around the time that Dave Thomas from Wendy's passed. And we were all very worried about, all right, here we have this great company, he's still involved as CEO. We want to make sure that we're transferring the equity of the human being, Charles Schwab, to the corporation, so we didn't have a Dave Thomas situation. So it worked on a couple of different strategic levels of trying to imbue the equity of the man into the company, own the approachability that was the one thing that we had, and then give people a call to action when they were frustrated with Wall Street. Tired of bad advice, talk to Chuck.
And what's interesting as I'm listening to this is that it's a founder's brand that wasn't acting like a founder anymore, and it lost its spirit. The part about just talk with Chuck, again, that humanization, it's the same thing that I mentioned in the other things. How do you get from being a big company to being something that someone actually cares about? And we generally care about people, not companies, which is... Now, the other aspect of that campaign that was really striking was it was executionally different. And that's part of this differentiation. It's not just having a position and having a nice line. You got to do stuff to separate yourself.
Yeah, that was a moment. So the technique that we used was called interpolated rotoscoping, and it's basically painting 16 frames of the 30 frames of film by hand, and then having a computer interpolate the balance of the 14. And it was originally done for the film Waking Lives. And we were all really nervous. We went into Chuck's office and said, we'd like to do this. And there were 4 executives sitting behind me. Chuck's coming out with his autobiography, and there's a little sidebar about this moment. And there were a bunch of executives standing behind me going, this guy's gonna fail hard. Because they thought, we're gonna put cartoons, you know.
This is not trying to protect you.
No, no,
Okay,
they were sprinkling lamb's blood on my legs. And we showed it to Chuck, said, this is kind of what it is, and if you notice that when everything's animated, you actually listen. When you actually listen, you're not paying attention to the details because you've stripped out a lot of the details that your brain tends to focus on, and you end up focusing on the words that are actually coming out of folks' mouth. And Chuck got it instantly, and he goes, turned to the CMO and goes, you're going to take us to the next level, huh? And that was it, and there were 4 people behind him. How did that happen? They did not see that coming.
That's a courageous moment.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. Okay, so let's fast forward. You arrive at Bank of the West. What was the situation? And we can certainly show the video now, or you can describe it and then we'll show the video.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about it and then we can show this goofy video I did. The situation was that this was like a utility bank that no one cared about. It operated in the background, and it was a bank that had all kinds of lines of business. It had a consumer business with branches, it had a commercial business, it had a small business division, had a wealth division, had a personal finance division. And, you know, the branches were tired, the face that it put out to the market was pretty much, we used to be good, but we're no longer. And when I started going through all the data, and you mentioned NPS, I went through the NPS data, nothing interesting there. I went through the JD Power data, nothing interesting there, and it also became clear that, we may talk about this later, but that every single retail bank reads the JD Power stuff as a Bible, and therefore the experience is completely undifferentiated bank to bank because they're all reading the same rule book. You walk in, greeting's important, so everybody greets you. And everybody knows it. And then I looked at the brand, and there was literally nothing in any of the data, and I didn't know this when I was interviewing. I had no idea what I was walking into. And I'm like, God, what are we going to do here other than just execute a little bit better? And I was hosting, we had an all-employee tennis tournament that employees from all over the world participate in. The final groups get to go to Roland Garros and play during the French Open. And as I was getting ready to do my opening of the tennis tournament, I was on the job, I think, for 9 days. I started just doing some research, and I found out we don't finance fracking wells, we don't finance Arctic drilling, we don't finance coal-fired power plants, we don't finance tobacco, we don't finance palm oil if it's not done right. And the little light went on and go, wow, this is a fundamentally different bank than I thought it was. And a lot of that was coming out of Paris. We're owned by BNP Paribas, so they had put all of these investment policies in place in 72 countries. But what Bank of the West had done is sort of sign them, put them in a manila envelope, and left them in a drawer. And so I unsealed that envelope, so to speak, and then started doing some research around, all right, how do we make something of this? And that's the first part of it.
So basically, as we talked about, sort of all banks seem to be the same. So when we talked on podcast, you mentioned The Big Fish and the book and how that guided your positioning work as a challenger brand. Can you sort of walk us through? I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about is, I know where you ended up, but you had 6 positionings. I mean, what were some of the others? And what did you find out in this process?
Well, we did some because we had obviously some business leaders who wanted to do something around simplicity. We want to be a simple bank, so we put a positioning together around simple. There was another one around accessibility, sort of a democratic angle, which is we have low fees, and even our wealth business, you can open up a wealth account with not a lot of money. So we had a sort of democratic angle, and then we had a couple different variations of the brand positioning that we'll see here in a little bit. And we went out and we tested it. We tested I think with 4 different cells of 200 respondents. LA, San Francisco, Portland, and Denver. And we went out and we knew, and this is some other context around the bank. First I'm going to ask, does anybody know the average age of a U.S. citizen? 48. 42. The average age of a U.S. citizen is 37.8 years old. The average age of a Bank of the West customer is 55 years old. So we knew that we needed to get younger customers in, and so the research, we designed it with 4 cells of 200 people in those 4 cities, and we went out and we started interviewing younger folks in urban areas, and we asked them 2 questions. One was, are you comfortable with technology? And 2 was, do other people come to you for your opinion? And we figured if we could get a younger person who was techno-savvy and an opinion leader in their circle, that if we could convince these people that this bank was worth going to, that would have a strong pull for other circles around that person. So after we did the research, it was unanimous that a sustainable positioning, there was an opportunity for a bank that was about sustainability and about sustainable finance, was incredibly different from everything else that was being talked about, and importantly, incredibly motivating, particularly to the younger folks, knowing they're looking at their own personal supply chains, and they're looking at, wow, what's my carbon footprint? And the thing that we discovered is that most people don't even think of their bank as part of their supply chain. They don't think of their bank having a carbon footprint, and they certainly didn't have the aha moment of, you know, when you put your money in a bank, it doesn't just sit there. It actually goes out in the world and does things. And you want your money doing those things in the world. And, you know, in San Francisco, you know, we articulate it as, don't protest something on Monday, just have your bank finance it, you know, the next day. So, that was at the core of the idea that came out.
So there's several things that we can unpack. One is the research that's interesting to me. If we're trying to differentiate, that means we can't appeal to all people all the time. So your research focused on a very select group of people who you hoped would be sort of amplifiers, influencers, if you will, and sort of help you extend the value of your dollar. So that's number one. But I want to get to now that the other notion is, you say that you're sustainable. Cool, okay. But you got to do something. And you guys did something, and it actually had some significant business impact in the short term.
Yeah, so we absolutely did something. It wasn't just like we said we don't do it, and moving forward, we actually had to call fracking companies, coal mine companies, petroleum companies all across the U.S. and say, we're not going to bank you anymore.
Put a nice bow on this thing. It isn't a strategy until you say no to something, until it costs you something somewhere. And that's a big cost. So now one can imagine that there was some upside in some other states that were a little happy to do that. So let's start talking about how you got this message out there.
Well, the first thing we did is we took I've had some very good luck with outdoor in my past lives in terms of its pop-up blocker proof, its DVR proof. So we did an analog digital mix. We took the entire media plan and made it digital. As you guys know, every set-top box, every cable box, every satellite box is an IP address. Every Hulu destination is an IP address. So we turned everything over into an addressable digital video buy, and then we augmented that with outdoor in key cities like San Francisco and LA. And the business responded. So right now we've triangulated 3 different data sources, and every single one of them tells us that when we're in market, business goes up 30% with new customers. And might be used to maybe show it.
Yeah, let's show
Yeah.
this at 15.
When your business puts its money in the bank, it doesn't just sit there. It goes out in the world and finances things. So ask yourself, what on earth is your bank financing? To learn about what we finance and what we don't, visit us at bankofthewest.com/whatonearth.
So, I don't know.
There's no puppies or grandmothers in it.
No, and one of the things that idea that never really thought about it, I wonder if any of you folks have, is that your money, and you use this language, your money has agency, that your money that goes into a bank actually does something. I just like you put it in there and all you want to do is make sure it was still there when you checked your account. And so that's a really interesting, somewhat cerebral idea.
Really something to bring forward.
Other question, I have a lot more questions, but does anybody? Yes, please.
So you talked about the revenue loss, but how did that pan out after the marketing went out? Revenue increase?
Yeah, so we've been in market since July. We finished last year with new households up 20%, which has never happened in the history of the bank ever, and it was off a pretty decent year before. And importantly, for our business, 50% of the entire bank is in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Business in LA and San Francisco was up 42%. And then beyond that, we had some huge wins come in. So right after we launched, we had one of the founders of WeWork come in with a net worth of $500 million and come in just on the wealth side for the sustainability positioning that we put out. Just this past week, you guys can look it up, the city of West Hollywood just moved their entire relationship to us, and they streamed their city council meeting telling the entire world that they're choosing Bank of the West because of our fossil fuel policies. And we don't even have a branch in West Hollywood. We don't even have an ATM, and they said we don't care. Their values align with our values, and the biggest strike against Bank of the West, they said, is having progressive values. So we've had some significant wins. There's a couple things in the pipeline right now that I can't talk about, but we are not only seeing significant new household growth coming in LA and San Francisco and Colorado and Sacramento, but we've also had some massive commercial wins come in. A ton. We've had a couple small business owners just come in and say, because you don't finance tobacco, I'm opening up an account. And one of the things that we talk about when it comes to tobacco, because you might just think that tobacco is a personal health decision, but the tobacco industry produces 4.5 trillion cigarette butts every single year. It's the single most littered item on the planet, and they are not made of cotton, they are made of plastic. 70% of all seabirds have a cigarette butt in its stomach, 30% of all sea turtles have a cigarette butt in its stomach, and every time a whale washes up on shore, a dolphin dies, its stomach is filled with cigarette butts. And so that the decision alone on tobacco has brought in some serious people, particularly people who understand ocean health. They said they understand the correlation there. It's not about lung cancer, it's about the health of our oceans.
I want to add one thing that you and I talked about is, so a lot of the time marketers think about marketing as first focus on acquisition, then we'll focus on customer retention and upsell, then we'll focus on employees. And the interesting thing about this campaign is that it had a huge impact on your employees in the ability to recruit and retain. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's let me just set the stage, and I'll go back to where I started. We're a sleepy, also ran bank that nobody pays attention to. And we're right across the street from LinkedIn, Twitter, Airbnb, Google, Facebook, and trying to attract talent to a regional bank with a sleepy brand is really difficult, to say the least. And when you have an initial job discussion with somebody in San Francisco, the first thing out of their mouth is, what are you doing to make this world a better place? And for 40 years, our bank did not have an answer to that question. And so what we found almost immediately was that our callback rates were greater, our speed to hire increased, and we had a couple of massive hires who basically said, I'm coming to you because of that, and they went to the billboard. And so it was incredible on the talent acquisition front, but from an internal morale, it changed the whole dynamic, because prior, what was the battle in banking? And eke out a couple more basis points of return. It was awesome. doesn't really motivate anybody. But now, when you've got a much deeper story and you realize that you are actually playing a meaningful role in the supply chain for people, and that there's actually a way in which we are incredibly superior to Wells Fargo, who is the world's largest fossil fuel bank for tar sands exploration. If you don't know anything about tar sands exploration, it is the most disruptive and environmentally harmful way of getting oil out of sand. So the Keystone Pipeline, all that, the largest single banker to the NRA, and now you've got 10,000 employees who want to come to work every day because they're proud of what they do, and that is a massive shift.
That's a big win. And bankers sometimes bring customers with them too.
That's the idea.
Yeah. One of the things you didn't cover, but it's in the podcast, is you had a part of the brand launch was a new logo. And we talked about, it's funny, all the banks in the world are red and blue, and you went green.
I didn't go green. Our logo is the logo of BNP Paribas, and so, but it was an asset, But it's also the starting context again is unaided brand awareness for Bank of the West in our footprint is 0%. Unaided brand awareness for BNP Paribas in the U.S. is 0%. And so we were not only introducing a new idea, we were essentially introducing a new brand to the U.S. because for 40 years our logo was a bear. Well, it's a fine logo, but it's also the mascot for Cal Berkeley. It's also on the state flag. It wasn't talking about not being able to own it. We couldn't own the bear. So the green box and the stars turning into a swallow was an important ingredient.
Right, so we're going to leave the bear in the woods. There's another question I saw. Yes, ma'am.
I know it's not been very long, but I'm really curious what kind of competitive reaction you've seen to the work.
We haven't seen very much competitive reaction. There are two things that we're keeping our eye on. So there's a bank called Amalgamated Bank, which is actually the bank of the Democratic National Convention, and they have a very, very similar story. And then you've probably seen on television a bank called Aspiration Bank. They have a very similar story. So that's not necessarily a reaction, but we've seen other lookalike models come up, and they're not copying us. I think this is a good idea. But we're lucky because Amalgamated Bank is on the East Coast. Aspiration is great, but it's just a piece of plastic and an app, and so they don't really have our capabilities. So Aspiration can't serve the needs of North Face. So we have an advantage there. But quite honestly, when you think about what's going on right now in there, this is a moment for us. Jamie Dimon's worried about Jeff Bezos. Wells Fargo is worried about every single DOJ employee coming back into the building. Brian Moynihan at Bank of America is worried about a whole other list of things. And so we've got to distracted our big juggernaut competitors, and that's who we compete with fortress balance sheets. They're all looking at other things. And they're fully incapable. So think we're the 30th largest bank. We wrote down $100 million. Now think of what that would cost Chase. And tell me their shareholders say, yeah, go ahead, write down $3 billion this quarter. No, it's not going to happen. So the first mover advantage at any scale is going to be here for a little bit, and so we like our odds. So we haven't seen, to answer your question, we haven't seen a lot of competitive reaction.
Amalgamated is an interesting story in and of itself. It is an East Coast bank. Their history is funny, as you were talking about, it seemed very much like Schwab. I mean, they came out of like a union bank, and so they have their roots in that area. So, okay, I saw another hand go up. Yes, sir.
I was interested, you talked about this sort of starting at the BNP level, and the sort of the policy that sort of got this all going was there. What's their branding like when you look at that back in Europe,
this is going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but just bear with me. The branding that you're seeing here is starting to be used all around the world. So we took this to Paris a couple times, and the very first time I sat in the global group head's marketing office and I showed it to them, and we bound everything in this beautiful white linen book to say, look, this is a story we want to tell here in the U.S. He opened it up to the first page and looked at his head of advertising for Paris and said, as I look at this work, I think we have a design problem everywhere else in the world. And then the last time I went over to sell the next round of work in, we put a video on, he hit the space bar and he goes, pause, he goes, pointed to the same person, goes, I want to see this green square everywhere around the world. They were using a very, very traditional advertising approach with a very complicated sort of mechanic in the advertising where there's a twist and there's a goofy visual and there was a very templated approach to how the work got art directed, and they're using this. So this tiny little bank from San Francisco is now dictating, if you go bypass the branch in Paris, it looks like this, the branch windows. So we're having a pretty big impact on that. And what's nice is that I get calls all the time, even our investment banking division in Hong Kong or London, they'll say, can you send us your brand toolkit? We want to do some work. So we're having a pretty big creative impact around the network.
Other questions? I have one more for you. One of the things that we talked about was that you had to make HR a friend. I thought that was really interesting. That was one of the first people that you made friends with. Why?
Well, there's the old phrase, it was Peter Drucker who always said, but it's strategy eats, or culture eats strategy over breakfast. And there used to be a trend where the CMO was really good friends with the CIO or the CTO. It's all about tech and it's all about data. I've actually found that it's your employees who are in charge of keeping the promise you make to the marketplace. And so I've always felt that behaviors, and I don't talk about values, I'm not a very big believer in brand values. I'm a very big believer in brand behaviors, because I think values are vague, behaviors are specific. You can evaluate somebody on behavior, you can't evaluate somebody on value. Values only manifest themselves as behavior. And so partnering with the head of HR on things like employee value proposition, things related to culture, things related to behaviors are really important because your employees keep your market promise for you.
Last chance for questions.
Oh, yes. To that point, is there an internal campaign with your employee audience in terms of living the brand?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And that's actually, it's one of the things, what we did is we did some agile sprint teams. We do an employee survey every year, and we identified some agile process sprint teams to go address some of the things. And one of the things that our employees told us is, we want to know how to live the brand a little bit more. And so we're doing everything from Meatless Mondays to Bike to Work. We're doing competitions on that. And the nice thing about my job is not just head of marketing, I'm also head of communications. So all corporate comm comes through me, so I get to feed the dog food right back in. It makes the job a little bit easier.
Well, I think in the West Coast Bank, your geography being more of a progressive area probably has helped your campaign. As you're looking at some of your neighbors, I have a two-part question. Has it helped bring in some of your, kind of big startup business on that front? And then the other question is, as you look at growth, how are you looking to expand, either regionally or across the country based on this campaign? How is that kind of factored?
I'm absolutely not answering that last question. I will answer your first one. The first one is we have a particular focus with female entrepreneurs. I mean, a very interesting thing about the bank is we're the only billion-dollar bank in the U.S. that is led by a female of color immigrant, and so we are highly differentiated from the very, very top of the house. 40% of our executive team are women, and so we have a great story to tell female entrepreneurs. We have a platform called We Connect for Women Entrepreneurs Connect, and so we are getting quite a bit of traction on the entrepreneur side, with particular emphasis on female-led entrepreneurs. The last question, no.
Sorry.
But it is important to note, I mean, just to get a sense of it, California is the 5th largest economy on the planet. It's bigger than the UK, it's bigger than France. And so our first job is to make sure that we are a great bank in California. So while we are the 30th largest bank in the country, we are the 6th largest bank in California. And so our job is to own California, and which is a difficult task, but an achievable task.
I'm curious, how many of you, raise your hand if you work for an organization that is purpose-driven? How many of you wish you worked for an organization that's purpose-driven? Okay, so that's what attracted me to this story. It's hard to talk about differentiation today without also talking about purpose. Those two come together. There's a very interesting reason why, and I will go back to Simon Sinek's book, in that if you differentiate on purpose, chances are that purpose is very personal. It relates back to the very essence of the company. So it's harder to differentiate without having a clear purpose. I love the fact that you talked about, we don't talk about values, but we talk about behaviors. Anytime I see value statement in a company, when you walk in the door, I know I'm in trouble, because that's not what makes the difference. The other thing that I thought was so interesting is in your journey to be a challenger brand, the research that you did, again, just focused on a key group of people. Often when you do research, you're looking for, it's mass, and you're thinking, we're going to go for it. And even though you are stealing share from the largest brands in the industry, you're stealing very specific share that will drive your demographics down. And so that, to me, is another part of this story. We talked about this, that there's a lot to be done. What's next?
What's next, I would say, is everything. What I mean by that is we're so early. We're so early in this process. Our global CEO thinks that it takes half a generation to flip the culture, which is 10 years. We're about 2 years into a 10-year journey to flip the culture of a company, and so we're very, very early days. And the thing is that it's easy in an artificial environment to see the work and go, oh, this makes a lot of sense. But it's very difficult when you don't have massive budgets to go. We still have to get this story out. We're working, trying to be as creative as possible to figure out how do we go into certain ecosystems. So there'll be more news here in the coming weeks, but we are looking at 1% for the Planet, which is an organization founded by Yvon Chouinard, who founded Patagonia, and it is a membership-based organization with 1,900 companies where all companies agree to give 1% of pre-tax revenue back to environmental causes. So we're going to forge a relationship with them that gives us access to 1,900 companies. We're working with Protect Our Winters, which a lot of the outdoor and ski organizations are seeing their ski season shortened and seeing the environment damage for outdoor sports. We're working with them, Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Institute, Sustainable Brands, to name a few. So we need to get the story out. That's at the end of the day, when inevitably, if I'm at a cocktail party and I'm telling the story, say, well, we're the only bank that doesn't do this, we don't do this, we don't do this. And oh, by the way, that bank that you're with does this, this, and this. The chin falls on the shirt and they usually grab my elbow and they go, how can I move my money to your bank? And so when you actually get the story out, it always ends with, that's incredible, how do I move my money to your bank? And the problem is that I just need 70 million conversations like that. And so that's what's next. We still have a lot of work to do. We did something fun this year. We launched Capture the Change on Instagram, the largest single photography contest on Instagram, where we ask people to go out and capture the change that they see in the world, capture the change they see in the environment, technology, and society. We had a couple National Geographic photographers participate. We're announcing the winners here in a couple weeks. So we're doing some things on social that are going to be pretty interesting coming up.
By the way, I love that feed as a big Instagram user. It's there's about 150 photos that are just feel good looking at it. And then I just for fun went and looked at 3 other banks feeds, and it was all over the place, and it was a place with grandmas and dogs and babies. It was hilarious. So I bet I'm going to see grandmas and dogs and babies at some point in the feed. It's going to happen.
I do want to go back to something Matt said, which is, there is a trend right now to be a purpose-driven brand, and the sad fact is that not everybody can be a purpose-driven brand. You can't make one up. And it's interesting because we spend a lot of time talking to fintechs in San Francisco. Borrow, Chime, you name it, Dubo, you name it. There's gobs of small fintechs that all offer sort of a mobile banking. You talk to them and say, we want to improve the financial health of our customers. And then you do the archaeology underneath that, and that's just what they're saying. They were actually started because they had seed funding from this place, and it's one of the things that attracts me to companies is there a real there? Are you actually a purpose-based brand, or are you making it up? And I think trying to separate the wheat from the chaff there is sometimes difficult, but it's a lot easier. This is an easy job because this is real. This is not spun sugar into cotton candy that we're kind of baking it. And it makes marketing a lot easier when you've got an authentic, purpose-driven company behind you.
Yeah, not to end on a downer, but BP was the poster child of the exact opposite of that, pretending to be one thing when they really weren't. And it hurt. Eventually you get caught if it's not real, if it's not fundamental. All right, well, first, Ben, thank you so much for your insights. This is a great thing. I wish we did this more in New York, so maybe you'll do a road show. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.